Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this event, the Green Recovery in the Northeast of Scotland, a Just Transition, which is a part of our annual Festival of Social Science. This national festival is in its 18th year, which is incredible, and it's funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. My name is Tavis. I'm the Interim Director of the Centre for Energy Transition at the University of Aberdeen, and I will be chairing this event. So I'm delighted to have with me today a great panel to discuss issues of a just transition in the Northeast and what that looks like. So I'd like to introduce our guests. First, we'll introduce Professor David Toke from the University of Aberdeen. David.
Thank you. I am actually reader in energy politics in the Department of Politics and International Relations. I am also in my spare time director of a non-profit company called 100% Renewable UK.
Thanks, David. And Dr. Thomas Muinzer.
Thank you. I'm Thomas Muinzer. I'm the co-director of the Aberdeen University Centre for Energy Law. It's a research-intensive institution based within the law school at the University of Aberdeen, and its staff is also involved in intensive energy education delivery. I'm a senior lecturer in energy transition law in the law school at Aberdeen, and I tend to focus in my research on climate and energy law and policy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Thomas. Gillian Martin MSP, welcome to the event.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm Gillian Martin, as you said, the MSP for Aberdeenshire East, just north of Aberdeen. But I'm also here in my capacity as the convener for the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee of the Scottish Parliament. So I'm usually in the position of doing quite a lot of listening to people like yourselves and translating your views into recommendations to the government on this area of policy. But also being an MSP for Aberdeenshire, I'm keenly aware of how important just transition is to the constituents and protecting people's livelihoods, as well as driving our country towards net zero. And the two things can often look incompatible, but I am determined that that's not going to be the case.
Thank you very much, Gillian. And certainly last but not least, Alison Stuart from Aberdeen Climate Action, one of our really engaged and active groups up here in the Northeast, including the Climate Week Northeast as well.
Hi, I'm Alison Stuart, as Tavis just said. I run Aberdeen Climate Action. I'm chair of Climate Week Northeast, annual festival of 10 days events in each March. I'm also a member of Aberdeen City's Net to Zero Delivery Unit when it finally has its first meeting, and I'm a lecturer and solicitor as well. So,
thanks very much, Alison. So a fantastic panel for everybody online to see today, to go through some of these key issues around just transition and the future of the Northeast in terms of the green recovery and hitting our net zero targets. So now we're going to move on to we have 4 questions today for the panel to discuss, and we'll go across in the order of the way that we introduced people today. And our first question around this critical and this really important topic is a really interesting question of who is the voice of the green recovery and who drives change in this region. So I'll hand over to David for a comment on that.
Well, I'd say it definitely shouldn't be BP who've been appointed as advisor to Aberdeen Council. I think this is a potentially disastrous decision from the interests of Aberdeen and the northeast of Scotland in general, because it threatens to lumber the region with a technology, carbon capture and storage, that is likely to be poorly adopted throughout the rest of the UK, even if it makes some headway around Aberdeen, and is unlikely to be a major innovative technology to promote the interests of Aberdeen in continuing to provide engineering products and services around the world. Rather, one should start off with a more bottom-up approach, which should, of course, involve the oil and gas industry and all the allied companies, but also opinion about technologies in general, because such research that has been done on attitudes to the various technologies that we'll need suggests that carbon capture and storage gets a particularly low rating, and I refer to the Climate Assembly organised in Westminster. We need one for Aberdeen.
That is a Citizens Assembly for Aberdeen, you're saying there, David?
Yes. Yes, definitely. Because there are a range of competing technologies here, and BP is making the technology choices which presumably it thinks are in its interests, and which I think a lot of people in Aberdeen will give them the benefit of the doubt. But the trouble is it in Aberdeen's best interests? And I think it's the technologies that they may choose, in particular carbon capture and storage, are not going to be in the long-term interests of Aberdeen and the Northeast, because I can see that it's going to require a lot of means of implementing it, a lot of consistent support from government at various levels, and it's a controversial technology, and I don't believe the consensus exists for it to be properly implemented. Certainly in competition with other things which range from heat pumps to green hydrogen, smart energy systems, etc., etc.
David, we'll probably come back to this point in some of the discussion, but in terms of who do you think, the voice of the transitions? Obviously, there's many voices of the transition in an area such as Aberdeen. So would you sense saying there should be much more diversity of voices coming from the ground up?
Yes, that's right. Technology choices need to be discussed and hammered out at great length. It is quite complicated, and people need to be involved and educated. Businesses, technologies start off and develop through markets, and also through people making choices of technologies through those markets, and also governments at various levels, of course, enabling some technologies more than others. But I think there's a problem here, is that the governments at different levels are going to be given the impression by the people who are the best resource lobbyists at the moment that a particular solution or set of solutions is the answer, when in fact the details and also the levels of support and the practicalities have not been properly looked at and discussed, and they need to be. And so we need to have this bottom-up discussion first, not top-down decisions that will be made as if this is just a technocratic process where there's only solutions that are understood by some experts. This is not the case.
Great opening statement there, David. Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll come back to this point in our discussion about how the public can discuss and the role in the public of facilitating different technologies. I'm going to cross over now to Thomas. Thomas, about this issue about the voice of the green recovery and who drives change in the region. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you. Well, it's an interesting question. Who is the voice of the green recovery in the Northeast? Who drives change? One starting point, one piece of the puzzle includes the devolved institutions, the Scottish Government, the Parliament. So let's start there. If we want to start there, I think we can usefully look at the Programme for Government 2020 to 21 that was published by the Scottish Government on 1st of September 2020. And it sets out the government's plans for the forthcoming year, and including its legislative programme. There's plenty to say in there about Northeastern innovation, £62 million targeted via energy transition, the Energy Transition Fund that's targeted at oil and gas and business in the energy sector over the forthcoming 5 years. It's intended to incentivise private investment in the Northeast. to stimulate energy diversification. The Scottish Council for Development and Industry is flagged in the programme as well, establishing 3 new so-called Scottish Club pilots. That's the Highlands, south of Scotland, but also including the Northeast, which of course is pertinent and indeed crucial for our particular interests today. And that's intended really to augment networks of businesses focused on improving their commercial activities, but it places a particular stress on enhanced sustainable economic growth. And the government's committed to continued support of the Northeast CCUS, trying to align industry, academia, private sector actors and so on to promote CCUS deployment in Scotland. That includes £300,000 targeted to support the delivery of the so-called Scottish Net Zero roadmap. And one intention is to identify strategies for taking advantage of low carbon infrastructure in the Northeast in particular. Page 47 as well also recognises the vulnerability of the Northeast's traditional oil and gas energy reliant economy, and it pledges particular, quote, support to the region in the context of the green recovery. So that's one part of the picture, the voice of the green recovery, the devolved institutions, elite actors, but that's only one part of the picture. The other part of the picture is everybody is the voice of this green recovery. The history of social change, social development teaches us that, for starters. The history of environmental law, which I spend a lot of time teaching. Environmental law, as we conceive it today, in essence emerged out of the environmental movement in the 1960s. The consciousness raising that occurred there, that was of a grassroots texture, public mobility, people were mobilized, people protested, people involved themselves, and we need no introduction to the importance of those practices underpinning civil rights, racial equality, the women's movement, and so forth. So history teaches us that these sorts of things aren't handed down from on high, that we're all involved. So climate campaigning, grassroots mobilization, public participation in the conversation, they all have significant and key roles to play in the green recovery. And actually, if I may say, the presence of Ms. Stewart from Aberdeen Climate Action as part of this talk is a case in point. I mean, her group's running important grassroots events. It acts as a public information hub in the sphere of climate decarbonisation, the green recovery. All of that's very, very important. So the short answer, who's the voice of the green recovery? Who can drive change? The short answer is we're all the voice of the green recovery. And that means we all can drive change.
And I guess the question there, if we all are the voice, if it's a plurality of voices across the social spectrum, then is that represented in current debates and discourses around the energy transition and the green recovery in the northeast of Scotland? That's just a point for us to discuss some further. And also, I think one of the tragic outcomes of many of around COVID and as the recovery starts to shape and hopefully move forward relatively quickly, is that the precarious role of people in uncertain employment and uncertain jobs, 0-hour contracts, and the devastating impact that's had on these parts of the community. Does that match up with some of our technological promises and choices for the green recovery? That's just maybe a point for the panel. And this is a major part of the just transition of energy justice and social justice around the just transition. We need to look after workers in current industries and make sure they have options. We also need to raise the bar on how we work with deprived communities, including around Aberdeen, for sure they have a genuine stake and role in this process going forward. And there is a gap there. There is a massive gap there to address, I think, going forward. We're going to move over now to Gillian MSP. You've heard some of the comments from Thomas outlining the ambitious program for government, and over to you on who is the voice of the green recovery.
Yeah, so I very much agree with an awful lot of most of what Thomas said there, and he's very helpfully for me outlined what my party doing in the programme for government and some of the schemes there. But I want to give a bit of background about my own personal feelings about just transition from a historical point of view. My family is not from this area. They moved to this area when I was very small, because of a lack of just transition in the shipyards of Clydebank. My father an engineer, now retired. It was one of the very few of his workmates in John Brown's engineering who wasn't on the dole, because there was a lack of just transition in that area. Is still recovering from the economic shock of the closure of the shipyards. I take this very personally. I'm glad that my dad moved us to the northeast, but I see a potential problem that if we don't have just transition in place from a socio-economic point of view, it's not going to be something that just lasts for a couple of years. It's going to be something that lasts for generations. And they were men mainly. Many men never worked again, and families were plunged into poverty and social deprivation. And these were people who were proud workers who'd worked their whole lives, worked very hard. Just in the same way that we have the people who are working in oil and gas and the supply chain from oil and gas. It's not just the people who are offshore, it's not just the people that are in those offices and actually directly involved in oil and gas, but it's the people like hospitality and everything, just the chain of events. So again, I take this very, very, very personally. And in terms of who's the voice of the green recovery in the northeast, I agree with Thomas in that it's everyone, but I think it has to be focused. It has to be focused more, because I think that even in this chat room here and the other actors throughout the northeast who have strong views on this, and everybody is a stakeholder as such, but we need to, as a region, coalesce and actually become almost a lobby group, because there's going to be, I would say, potentially a bit of a fight for the Scottish National Investment Bank money, for who gets the research centres, who gets the innovation money, who gets the, in terms of Scotland, and there'll be strong lobbyists from those areas as well, like Fife and from Dundee, and they are deserving of that investment too. But one thing that I would say is that, basically, I'm putting I couldn't really answer that question, because I was like, who is it? There's no one person. So it has to be a number of us getting together, and from a few different areas. And I've just been scribbling some, so we've got people in this room, we've got the universities, we've got the existing research institutes, we've got Opportunity Northeast, we've got the politicians in the area who have an interest. Not all of them will have an interest in this, but particular politicians might. We've got the unions. Effectively, if you look at the Just Transition Commission and you look at the makeup of the Just Transition Commission, that they have got people from stakeholders from all aspects of this. And to be honest, I think that we should be really thinking quite urgently about having a Northeast, not so much a version of that, but almost like a lobbying group to make sure that the Northeast, and I will take exception with David saying Aberdeen all the time, because this is not just an Aberdeen issue, this is a northeast of Scotland issue. And we're all, Aberdeen's just the city, my constituents, I don't know what the numbers are that work in oil and gas, but I certainly know the knock-on effect will affect absolutely every single one of them. So I think that question is a good springboard for saying, well, who is the voice? And are we happy with the people that we do think are shouting the loudest about certain things? And I agree to a certain extent with David, is that if the loudest voices for the green recovery are the people that are actually from the industry we're having to transition from, then we've got a bit of a problem there, because the people that Tavis has just mentioned are not going to be represented by that voice. And there's going to be shareholders in the background of that voice as well. So it has to be all of us. And I think key to that as well is having the political understanding from the people who actually can influence government policy, not just at Scottish Parliament level, Scottish government level, because Scottish government, as everybody knows, only has finite resources in terms of what they've got in their fiscal settlement to put into this. We cannot do a Germany and do a 4% of our GDP into this, because we cannot borrow money. We have a situation where we still have reserve policy areas, particularly in energy, and around licensing, for example, and the gas grid and whatever. And if they're not tackled at Westminster level, then we haven't got a hope in hell of having a green recovery just powered by the Scottish government. So we need to make sure that we have the knowledge and understanding from people like yourself, from unions, from individuals, from all areas of the socio-economic makeup of the North East in the room. And then we have the politicians who understand what the complexity is of the situation and lobby at both governments for targeted investment and change, and putting our money into the right things, because we don't have time to muck about, basically. So that's where I would end.
There's definitely a sense of urgency that we can't forget this, with really 10 years to really get major achievements really on the road to our net zero ambitions, and obviously those changes start today and now. The just transition is now, not 5, 10, 20 years. It begins now. So over to you, Alison. You've been working at the community level for quite some time and doing some amazing work in Aberdeen Climate Action. What's your perspective from civil society and climate activists and individuals?
Well, I have to say that I'm in complete agreement with every single one, which is quite unusual in the panel of the speakers. and I really want to address what Gillian was saying, because something I've been working on over the last year is creating a plan of action. What I truly believe in is that we need a regional joined up approach. There needs to be a Northeast transition council and mechanism. We need to come together, bring every single person in the stakeholders together. We need to create a strategy. We need to have an action plan with specific outcomes, and we need to have that financed. And that comes into the green finance question we're going to discuss later. But what I totally and passionately believe in is that we need a joined up regional approach. At the moment, we've got two councils not working together. We've got Aberdeen City Council doing a very narrow industry energy transition and we have Aberdeenshire doing climate ready Aberdeenshire, which is focused on adaptation, not mitigation. And we've got all different stakeholders doing their own thing. And it's all a mismatch as a waste of resources. And we need one common voice, just like Gillian was saying, just like Thomas and also David was saying, we need to work together. We need a collaborative, joined up regional approach, which is holistic and deals with not only our reliance on the fossil fuel industry here, but also about what we want our region to look like. We need to start with what we want to achieve and work back from that. And that involves every single person. And so what I personally would like to see is I would like to see a regional council made up of stakeholders with a secretariat, which basically brings together working groups and formulates decisions and has a climate assembly and deliberative and participatory democracy angle, so that we all get listened to and we can all come together to create the community that we really want to be. We all have our voice, and that's what we should have. At the moment, what we have though is we have all these amazing, we've got so many new climate action groups and community groups springing up everywhere, but there's a lack of support for them. And there's a lack of them being heard because they've not got strong enough voice. We haven't got the money for lobbyists. And there needs to be a structure that enables that to occur. At the moment, with the Scottish Government, we've got this idea of community hubs, climate action hubs, but that hasn't happened yet because of COVID. So it kind of gets a lack of prioritization in some regards. We have, at the moment, we have a top-down approach. And we have very much what everyone else has said. We have lobbyists from vested interest, business vested interest being listened to, because they, with the money, they have the voice of government or decision-making policymakers, and it's quite a biased view that comes out. Obviously, from the Northeast perspective, it's more important for our region than any other region in Scotland because of the fact that we're heavily reliant in every single sector on the business that the oil and gas industry brings in, and we need to have a just transition. And as we have heard from Tavis as well, and from Gillian, the kind of personal impacts of that, we need to ensure that we have good quality jobs. And so we need to listen to the workers and not just simply listen to the people, the shareholders in effect, because what they want is profit and they don't really care about the Northeast. but the people that live here do. So we need to hear from them what they want. And I tell you what they want, because I've been listening to them, and Friends of the Earth have just come out with a report as well on the question that they sent out. Well, actually, the questionnaire wasn't as inclusive as I might like it to have been. And really what they want is they want the companies to act. So many people in oil and gas companies want transition, and so many people within the upper management want transition, but the issue is how to get there. So we need to all come together to really discuss this. There needs to be structure, and there needs to be regulation from the top. And I'm kind of going into what I'm going to say later on as well, but there needs to be structure, and that's what we're going to come into. There cannot just be one voice. We have to come together and create a communal voice.
Thanks very much, Alison. And so we'll segue now into the second question here. And this second question really is starting to talk about some of the different approaches and technologies. And we tend to hear in the Northeast essentially what I'm calling the big three, which is offshore wind, hydrogen production in all its forms as a vector, and CCUS, which is also, as David alluded to, is a controversial technological choice. And I think the big three is certainly a lot of industrial interest in these, and all of them have different contributions to make towards net zero energy transition. But that's not the only things that are happening, and there are energy efficiency, for example, or insulation of housing, or microgrids and community ownership of energy, all these other fantastic things we can throw into the mix. But certainly one of the dominant technologies, and the one that holds some potential, and that word is important, potential for job creation, how long in the future we don't know, is hydrogen. And we can't, hydrogen is massively on the policy agenda, both the Scottish government and the UK government. It's on the commercial and industrial agenda here, although obviously we're starting from a very, very low point, and there are some debates about blue versus green hydrogen. So what is the role of hydrogen as you see it within the green recovery? Is it being prioritized as a vector over other forms? What role can it make in providing future employment and jobs? And will it happen fast enough to address actually the problems with the downturn in employment from the COVID crisis? So with that, there's probably about 100 questions in there. Sorry, David, but over to you, David, for a comment on hydrogen.
Well, hydrogen has important niche possibilities, but I do think there is some excessive hype about it. I think you've got to look at primarily a renewable energy future as far as the northeast of Scotland and in general is concerned, and what technologies best fit with that, as well as fitting in with providing consumers with clean, reliable and affordable energy services. And when you look at it in that sort of mix, it's not obvious that hydrogen becomes the first choice for almost everything that you hear it doing these days. There are some clear niche opportunities where it can possibly fit in where other renewable energy-based solutions can't, for instance, possibly in shipping, perhaps through ammonia, which can be a product of hydrogen, steel, making concrete, perhaps large vehicles, although even in the large vehicles sector, there is growing competition with electrically driven vehicles. But certainly Aberdeen, and the buses, this is plausible. I'm not arguing that it isn't. But as far as hydrogen is concerned, the thing you ought to be pressing on with is the innovation in technology, which in the world today is likely to be in promoting electrolyzer technology from renewables, converting renewable energy, primarily, certainly in the case of northeast Scotland, offshore wind power into hydrogen. And I repeat, it's unlikely to be carbon capture and storage, which at best will be of interest to places which are oil and gas producers and whose industrial bosses want to try and hang on to their business somehow. But one can go into the details of that. But this requires quite a coordinated transformation to get carbon capture and storage delivering hydrogen on the sort of basis that BP has proposed. You'll need a lot of consistent government funding, a lot of consistent reorganization of regulations, and a lot of refurbishment of a lot of systems. And in order to do that, you need a broad consensus of political support, which just is not there for this technology. I think there's a lot of uncertainties about it, I must add, a lot of question marks which have not been answered, and I suspect won't be answered particularly well. But there just is no discussion of all this, and people are given the impression this is all going to be hunky-dory, and all they need to do is to work out the details. I'm sorry, and I'm sorry about going on about this so much, but it does seem that, and it is particularly Aberdeen's problems in this broader northeast context, that they appear to be putting the majority of their eggs in this basket. And Aberdeen and the northeast, if it takes it along with it, will be left high and dry with a controversial technology that can't be properly implemented when the time comes.
David, could I just ask you on that point? Some of the factors around upscaling hydrogen deployment, blue and green, is about cost and is about the ability to produce it in enough quantities to actually support the economy. And some of the debates around this in terms of blue hydrogen reformed from methane essentially with CCS, is that in the short term, it's cheaper and we can do it faster and get it going relatively quickly. And then over the medium term, sort of the 10-year plus frame, we can then get the costs down for electrolyzing of green hydrogen and at a scale that is relevant. Is that transition within a transition of hydrogen, is that something you think is feasible, or is it a case of no, we have to go straight to electrolyzation, but we'll have to wait for it?
Well, that's what the public relations handouts from the oil and gas industry say. But you can tell from the reaction of organizations like the International Renewable Energy Agency that they do not think this strategy will help develop green hydrogen. The opposite. There is a fairly limited market for hydrogen at the moment. Sure, it's likely to grow bigger. But if that's taken up by this blue hydrogen, then obviously green hydrogen is marginalized. It needs market share. Hydrogen is already dominated by steam reformation. And the aim, the implicit aim of the oil and gas industry is to freeze out green hydrogen for as long as it takes. It needs growing market share. This is what happened with solar power and wind power. It gained market share, and it was allowed to do that with protected markets initially, which are now becoming much less protected. You know, so much so that people now want to protect the nuclear industry. Anyway, I'm not going to go into all that.
Thomas, we have to move over to you now on your views of the role of hydrogen as a key part of the energy transition.
Thank you. Yeah, I think as a lawyer, maybe I'll raise some points around this from a legalistic perspective, some sort of narrowish points that I think it's interesting to point out in relation to green hydrogen and the green recovery, and indeed blue hydrogen. A main point is the UK, taking the UK generally, it really lacks a clearly defined legislative framework for hydrogen projects, sort of taken generally across multiple sectors at the moment. And that means that legal and regulatory gaps remain to be filled. A consequence of that is that scenario will hinder the contribution that green hydrogen, indeed blue hydrogen, might make in going forward. And so it's a hard problem that will need careful attention and refinement. So just to flesh that out a little, in terms of legislation, there's very little legislation relating specifically to hydrogen in a way that caters to green and blue hydrogen, let's say. It currently tends to be interwoven in the pre-existing regimes that are basically governing gas in some general sense. So if you take hydrogen, it falls within the definition of gas in the Gas Act 1986, and that means it's regulated as part of the gas network in that regard. UK gas market itself is regulated by the Gas and Electricity Markets Authority, often operating through Ofgem. And that means there's a particular licensing regime for gas supply and operation, and that bites on aspects of green and blue hydrogen. It may bite on them fulsomely, it may not. It's quite unclear. You'd need very technical legal advice in certain cases to decipher how the emerging technologies interact with kind of old school legal frameworks that aren't entirely fit for purpose. We do know gas licenses need to comply legally with, you know, like industry codes. There are a whole welter of industry codes. There's a retail energy code, supply point administration agreements, many other examples. There's a gas safety management regulations 1996 suite of regulations that can apply, and there's a Scottish derivation of that. If you have a major hydrogen project, let's say just a major hydrogen project, it's possible it would be a nationally significant infrastructure project. That would therefore require a development consent order dealt with under the Planning Act 2008. If it's some smaller project, maybe pipelines or whatever, could be dealt with under the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 and the equivalent Scottish legislation which regulates consents. The Scottish Government has a particular rule in planning consents. So there's a whole welter of legal issues that arise in this area in the context of a framework that's not developed specifically to cater to, say, green and blue hydrogen issues. And, you know, if you're dealing with infrastructure, it will likely raise complex issues around land rights that may need to be secured and obtained. Environmental impact assessments could be involved in projects, say, relating to the storage of hydrogen. There's a whole welter of things for a lawyer that is eyebrow raising. That's an absolute tip of the iceberg. I haven't said anything about the very extensive health and safety regime that operates under the law in this area. I could go into detail on that. And setting aside the legislative regime, just think about the regulatory regime. So with regulatory bodies that tend to operate in this sort of area, you're talking about local authorities, Town and Country Planning Authority, Health and Safety Executive, Oil and Gas Authority with you know, pipelines decommissioning, that sort of thing, Ofgem regulating the gas network. There's a UK vehicle certification agency that one would deal with if you're getting approval of vehicles to transport hydrogen. So it's this whole, from a lawyerly perspective, complex legal and regulatory regime that partly reflects the fact that UK Gov and that don't really have a very richly developed strategy in the area of green and blue hydrogen. The legislative and regulatory regimes will need to catch up. And just briefly to close, if they don't, they'll act as an overall inhibiting factor on development in that area. And what one, in a sense, can do, it'll impact how these energy forms are prioritized and so forth. So long story short, regulatory and legal regime is currently, it's underdeveloped. There's a lack of a clearly defined national strategy as well, and indeed a regional strategy in the case of Scotland, and that impacts the area of Scotland that we're particularly interested in today, creates problematic circumstances at that more regional level, and those issues really hinder the contribution that hydrogen can make in that sort of context to the green recovery at present. So just in purely dry legalistic grounds and so on, a lot of work to be done to increase the enabling capacity here in this area.
So I see David has his hand up there, but I just want to hear from Gillian and Alison first, and we'll come back to the questions because we need to keep on top of our timing here. Gillian, so clearly there's a lot of work done in the policy and the regulatory sphere to be done around hydrogen. And also, you know, we discussed today that these changes are technological and economic choices, but they're also social choices as well. And does hydrogen offer some sort of bridging element or to at least address the downturn in employment? We've heard numbers about potential job losses of 30,000 jobs in the energy industry as a result of the current downturn. Is hydrogen, can hydrogen in whatever form, blue or green, tend to help us resolve this and get jobs out there for energy workers?
I guess that's what I'm most interested in. I'm not a scientist. I don't know, and there's a lot of unknowns about hydrogen, and I get that, and you're the experts on that. People in the room, this room, are the experts on that. What I care about is seizing an opportunity. If there's an opportunity, if there's a demand for hydrogen, if it's going to be one of the big changes in our energy supply, then I don't want someone else doing it. I want the Northeast to be doing it. Okay, and I'm going to say that because I'm representing the Northeast and because of everything I've said in the previous answer. I am very interested in the fact that there's other European countries that have a demand for hydrogen already. Germany in particular. Germany can't produce its own hydrogen, but they're turning to hydrogen to power quite a lot of their heavy industry. Right, so they're going to want to get that supply from somewhere. And if we're in a situation where the hydrogen is produced as a result of the natural gas that we've got, then that can protect the jobs in oil and gas to a certain extent, where we need that kind of feedstock supply for hydrogen, we'll need the feedstock supply for manufacturing, and there'll be a certain amount of protection of jobs. And the oil and gas industry, in terms of its own carbon footprint, are driving it down as fast as they say in terms of actually how they produce things, then we might have this feedstock, so we're not actually burning carbon, but we're producing hydrogen, and the oil is going to be a feedstock for manufacturing, right? So, and we're able to export, and I don't know how that's done, because again, I'm not a scientist, but we're able to export a very valuable commodity to other parts of Europe, UK, whatever, who have a demand for this. And I don't want to see anyone else doing that. I don't want to see this area being a complete ghost town where somebody else steals a march in it, in a similar way that Denmark has with regard to wind turbines. I think it's a real source of regret that we weren't in there first. And we're not making that hardware in Scotland. We're doing very well with actually sort of like putting it out there and capturing the energy from wind, but everything's imported. And the jobs, the manufacturing jobs for that are not in Scotland. They're not in places where they've got a real good manufacturing kind of, history, like Fife, like the place I've talked about my parents come from, like Aberdeen, like Dundee. So that's my main interest. Sorry, my Siri has got very excited about what I just said there, and it started to speak back to me. So that's my interest in hydrogen. It's not the only tool in the box as far as the green recovery goes. And I have to say that one of the things that's been very interesting, listening to David's cynicism about carbon capture and storage, the carbon capture and utilisation route is also very interesting to me. But one of the things that the Committee for Climate Change has said repeatedly in its most recent reports is that we're not going to get to net zero and the very challenging targets without CCS. So, that's in the mix as well. But my main thing is, are we so risk averse in this country that we think, well, we can't try anything unless it's a guaranteed success? Well, history teaches us that there's no such thing as a guaranteed success. There's people that take a punt on things and they win out. You lose some, you win some, you lose some. Scotland's got a really proud history and actually, making the right decisions and being forerunners in technology. But in the last couple of decades, I'm afraid that the smaller European countries like Denmark, Norway, have taken chances on things that we could have, and we could have been the people manufacturing a lot of the renewable technology. And if hydrogen's out there and hydrogen's going to be wanted by markets throughout the world, we maybe need to take a punt on it.
Thank you, Gillian. And Alison, we're over to you. And we're just going to, for the next round, we're going to switch the order. So we'll be back to you again, Alison, for the finance questions.
Okay. So so in Aberdeen Climate Action, we've had a lot of debate about hydrogen, and we've got a lot of really good engineers, and so we've got some really good literature now. And what comes out quite clearly is that it's undecided, but that there hasn't been sufficient research done on what happens to hydrogen demand if we do what we really should do first, which is insulate retrofit, think about energy efficiency. And though as Tavis said, we've got 9 years. We've got 9 years. It's that urgent. And we've got to be thinking about where we prioritise our money. We've got a finite pot of money, as Gillian was saying. The Scottish Government have only got a certain amount that they can use. And we need to think about where we can make the best impact of that. So to my mind, we need to be, and I think it's not to my mind because I've taken a lot on from other people, is that we need to be concentrating on energy efficiency and insulation. And I never understand, it's a point of absolute and utter anger to me actually, that we haven't actually got regulation of the building of new buildings that says they have to be completely insulated and they have to be energy self-sufficient. That the amount it costs to retrofit is extreme, and we should be doing that immediately. If we then do that, if we make all new buildings self-sufficient energy, and I mean by that all the heat pumps, the solar panels, insulation, then the demand for heating goes down. And the main argument for hydrogen at the moment from the vested interest businesses is about decarbonisation of heating. We have to have hydrogen because of decarbonised heating. If we go along the route of, as I say, insulation and reduction of energy needs, then we have less of a need for the decarbonisation of heat because we won't have a need for heating so much. In fact, we shouldn't need to have a need for heating in buildings because we should build them so we don't need heat in them so much. And what we also should be thinking about is community distributive power. So basically, if we have distributive power right where the community, where the houses and buildings are, then that deals with the issue of energy. And it deals with the issue of the grid as well, because a lot of what people say about the fact that we need hydrogen is because the grid can only cope with so much, and we're pretty much at capacity at the moment, so we can't electrify everything. We can't electrify heat and this and have electric cars because of the grid. So if we decentralize the grid and we use a battery source like electric cars anyway in relation to the grid, things become a lot more possible. Now, I totally agree that there is a place for hydrogen. I think we have to have a mix. We cannot, and we need to look at all options here. We're going there, but we need to focus on money where the best impact is made. So hydrogen, yes, definitely, when it comes to community wind farms, like there is in Orkney, like there is discussions in Huntly about using that for green hydrogen, brilliant. We do need it for things like hard to energize things like freight, like aviation to a certain degree, like shipping, like large lorries, etc. That is a good way to use it. But do we need it completely? I think that it's a retrograde step. I can't help but feel there's been a huge amount of lobbying from vested interests in oil and gas to keep their business going. If you look at oil and gas predictions, we have natural gas like this, and decarbonisation, the natural gas is as much, if not bigger. They want to continue their market share. It's completely obvious why they would. But hydrogen is a vastly inefficient energy source. The amount of energy that it takes to create hydrogen is huge. It's hugely inefficient. You wouldn't want to use that if you had any other source of energy. So if you're talking about using natural gas to create hydrogen, you're talking about using an awful lot more natural gas to get the same energy output in relation to creating hydrogen. And what you're also talking about at the moment is grey hydrogen. We're not talking about blue hydrogen because we haven't got blue hydrogen, because we haven't got the capacity for CCS yet. The technology might be there, but the actual time it would take to have blue hydrogen is past 10 years. That's what all the experts are pretty much saying. And at the same time, they're saying that we shouldn't do green hydrogen because it takes longer than 10 years. Well, they're kind of similar then in that case. So my question is, are we looking at hydrogen because we just want to continue with oil and gas production? Or are we looking at hydrogen because we find it a very valuable standalone fuel by itself? And I happen to think that here in the Northeast, it happens to be more that we're driven by the need to keep the oil and gas industry going than actually the real thought about where hydrogen sits in the energy mix. So whereas I do understand and I completely get and I agree with the fact that we need to invest in hydrogen and to boost it so that by after 10 years that we have something, I do believe it should be more green, like the Dolphin project outside Aberdeen, that we need to be thinking about, if we want CCS and we want hydrogen, then I'm sorry, it has to be coming, the money has to come from somewhere. At the moment, it's demanding on the taxpayer. We're yet again asking to be paid for this, as well as decommissioning. And the oil and gas companies have billions in profit and they want us to pay for it. Now, I think that obviously we do have a responsibility as a country and a government to provide certain infrastructure. But I'd be looking for the government to provide regulation to say, if you want to keep on extracting oil and gas, then you pay for the carbon emissions. So exactly what Christina Figueres has always said, and that she said to oil and gas companies, fine, if you want to keep on doing oil and gas, fine, but you have to pay for the carbon extraction. So if we had the regulation from government forcing CCS, then you'd find that it was a viable business stream for companies to do. At the moment, it's economically unviable for companies to pursue CCS because there isn't a market for it. So in my view, yes, by all means, let's pursue hydrogen, but let's not pour all the public money into it. Let's pour the public money into the things that really are hard hitting. And in relation to the Northeast and our need to transition, we need to be transitioning in a very diversified fashion and not onto any one industry. I think we need to learn our lessons from the bust and boom of oil and gas. And we've got a great technical engineering base here, and we need to build on that in clean tech and not just in energy. And I think there has to be a wider diversification. And we also need to be thinking about marine energy for intermittency. And we've got a huge amount of new inventions for marine that aren't being invested. And we need to be looking at our startups. And that's one way we can really make a difference. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. So we're actually almost out of time, yet we have 2 questions to go. So what I'm going to ask, I'm going to go back to David now. David, I'm going to ask everybody to keep their comments within a minute or 2. I'd like you, if you wish to comment on how the Northeast as a whole benefits from green finance and the green finance question, but also frame that in the context of your concluding remarks about what a just transition should look like for the Northeast. We may go a little bit over time, but I do want to keep this relatively on track for the audience out there who are watching us on this. So over to you, David. So Northeast as a whole, how can we benefit from green finance, and what should the just transition look like for the Northeast? And please keep your comments to about a couple of minutes.
Well, I agree. I agree with everything Alison said about the heating market. Energy efficiency should be first, and heat pumps should be developed as the supply side, partially energy efficient side as well. That's what the Northeast should be focusing on more, developing the industry there and getting the finance to help it do that sort of thing, as well as green hydrogen, not this carbon capture and utilization and storage, whatever you want to call it. I mean, do you think the Germans are going to want reconstituted methane, which is partially done with a lot of issues, as opposed to green hydrogen? They're going to ask for green hydrogen. And the Danes, in as much as they're going for hydrogen, are investing in green hydrogen. Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen will be left stranded high if it goes for this carbon capture and storage. And by the way, Thomas pointed out a lot of legal and regulatory issues. And you know, the opponents of carbon capture and storage are going to mobilize if this is forced on them, and they will use at least some of these pinch points to thwart it. Because if you look at the public opinion surveys, there's a lot of doubt about this, and there's a lot of unanswered questions about the CCUS. It hasn't been subject to public debate, and I think when it does, the wheels will drop off.
And David, just in terms of what a just transition should look like for the Northeast, just to wrap up your views for today?
Well, it should involve, firstly, a bottom-up discussion of all the people involved. And I mean all the people involved, with no preconceived decision being made. And it should involve us putting forward plans for a fully innovative green suite of transition technologies, focusing in particular on the things Alison mentioned and others, things that are genuinely innovatory and can be implemented now. We don't have to wait until the whole of the gas system is reconfigured or something or other.
Thank you, David. Thank you, and thank you for your comments today. Thomas, over to you on how the North East can benefit from green finance, and what should the transition look like?
Thanks very much. I'll just roll those two questions into one, if I may. I'm seeing, for the convenience of time for us, how can we ensure that the North East as a whole, I'm seeing in the text of the third question, benefits from green finance? By as a whole, I would take that to mean, as it should correctly mean, not just the whole region, but the whole of society. So from top to bottom, the whole of society should be benefiting from green finance and the green transition, broadly speaking. And that goes right to the heart of this theme of what should a just transition look like. So the fourth question, so how does the whole of society benefit, and what should that just transition look like? Well, in terms of what the just transition should look like, one won't necessarily find a general principle that allows us to answer that question. Instead, things proceed in a pragmatic way, in incremental ways, as we're dealing with an issue that pervades society. And we just don't know entirely what the world will look like, say, in half a century. So we face into an uncertain new world, but what we can say in the North East and elsewhere is we want to transition carefully. We want to do it thoughtfully. We want to do it in a socially just and a socially responsible manner. And so for the North East, including, and of course not limited to Aberdeen and its surrounding environs in particular, that will mean, amongst many other things, carefully managing impacts on workers and others in the oil and gas sector, key part of the economy in Aberdeen and beyond and so forth. But also it will mean managing changes to the culture of a locale. So as regards culture, which is an often neglected consideration, there'll be, again, if you take Aberdeen in particular, there will be a gradual cultural shift as we move, well, in the North East, from a society that in part defines aspects of its character on traditional North Sea oil and gas towards a more low carbon orientated sense of self as we transition away from a more traditional energy base. So Professor Gavin Little from a group called Connecting with the Low Carbon Scotland, funded by the RSE, he talks often about the notion of electrocultures, and that's the way in which energy contributes to our cultural sense of self and our sense of place. So those electrocultures, those considerations need to be baked into the cake here as well. So that's the sort of profound just transition we're looking towards and working towards in that incremental, pragmatic, careful and socially just way in the North East and indeed beyond.
Thank you, Thomas. Gillian, over to you for the final couple of questions and a roundup.
Hi, so I haven't been particularly political until now, but I'm going to get political because I am absolutely fed up of the ideology that goes in a completely different direction, stymieing our climate change ambition. And I want all the decisions that are all the levers to everything that Alison's talked about in particular to rest with the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government, because on the one hand, if we don't have a kind of UK drive to zero, if we don't have all the levers in place from tax incentives for green finance or the regulatory systems that are going to incentivize a shift, then we're stuffed. So if they don't have this as a priority, there's only so much the Scottish Government can do and not so much the Scottish Parliament can legislate on to assist everything that's going to get us to a just transition in this area, but all the whole of Scotland as well. So I'm actually fed up of vested interests down at a Parliament and a government that I don't have any control of, pulling the strings on this matter. So I'm going to leave it there because that's my view, is that we've got a better chance at a just transition if all the levers are closer to home in the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government, and then we can start making decisions in the same way that the likes of Denmark do around what their energy mix is going to be and how they're just transitioning out of this situation. And also coming back to what I said before about the borrowing powers, that we can actually finance it because we can borrow, we can do what Germany's doing with the green recovery. We can substantially say that we are going to invest 4% or whatever that might be of our GDP in this project because we have not got any time to lose on this. And we're going to front load our investment in this in the hope that in future generations it pays off. At the moment, we can't do that. So I'm sure that you didn't expect me to be particularly political, because I'm here as a convener of our committee, but that's my feeling on this more and more as this conversation goes on.
And Gillian, thank you for those comments. This is a festival of social science, so this is exactly the place to be political, and we certainly encourage political views as an inherent part of the debate around the just transition. So Alison, over to you for the final few points about the benefiting from climate finance and your vision, and what should a just transition look like in the northeast of Scotland.
So I'll keep it short and sweet, honest. What I think is that a just transition should be regional. It should be collaborative. It should involve community wealth buildings, which all work together to support each other locally. It should involve good quality jobs and a diversified local economy. And it should be holistic. So it should involve safe, active travel and public transport to the hierarchy, insulated and energy sufficient houses, should have a circular economy, local food growing with a route to market, local producers with a route to market, healthy, biodiverse, thriving place, connected virtually with fast broadband and local working hubs, support and finance for sustainable innovations, reskilling and appropriate education and training, community empowerment and learning and supporting each other. And how can we get all this? Well, to my mind, it's quite simple. We need to come together and have a cohesive, inclusive, regional strategy and action plans that provides a real framework and deliverabilities for transitions to net zero, with green finance allocated in line with this plan. And that's my thoughts on the matter.
What a wonderful way to sum up. And I think we've really touched upon many points today, how this is a very diverse process. There's a lot of voices involved here. There are a lot of ways forward, and that those communities need to be listened to and brought into this process of planning for a just energy transition. It has been an absolutely fascinating hour and 7 minutes. I thank you for our viewers and I thank you to our speakers for going slightly over time. I think these ideas and these debates around a just transition from the social sciences and the legal perspectives are really need to be magnified, and we need to hear a lot more of this in the mainstream debates around energy transition, and particularly in relation to informing policy and societal engagement going forward. It's been a thoroughly interesting time, and I really like to thank our speakers, everybody today, David, Thomas, Gillian, and Alison. Thank you for your really valuable insights and input to this really fascinating topic going forward of such relevance to us here in the northeast of Scotland. I'd like to thank you all for attending the social science events, and we hope you enjoyed it. And if you do have a minute to spare, please do visit our webpage as well. abdn.ac.uk/engage/FOSS shown on the final slide here, and please do fill in the feedback form and enjoy the events going forward this week in the Festival of Social Science. You can also find out about the other Festival Social Science events taking place on the website. So thank you to our viewers, thank you to our speakers, and I look forward to many more in-stream conversations about the just transition and putting it into practice with our communities. Thank you very much, everybody.